As much as it seems like it's simplifying things, if you look at their record on the road, it was their worst since 1992. I mean, that's almost difficult to do. 10, 20, and 11 was their final record away from Wells Fargo Center. You can't make the playoffs like that. And if you somehow did, I mean, there's just no way of winning a series with that kind of record if you don't have home ice, and the Flyers certainly wouldn't have with the record that they finished with this season.
Yeah, Dave, I think I read somewhere that they were the 5th best team at home in the Eastern Conference, which would tell you that, this is a pretty good team. And we talked about a lot that they beat good teams and they weren't able to beat bad teams. You factor in the road record with that, and I guess it's a pretty good formula for sitting at home for the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And nobody seemed to have a good reason as for why that was. It was almost uncanny, the way that they played against teams that came in either into Wells Fargo Center or they went onto the road and took on these teams in their home rinks, teams that are vying for or are playing, this week in the playoffs. The Flyers could hang with them, and then Carolina Hurricanes come to town, and all of a sudden they fold like a cheap suit. So nobody seemed to have a good reason as to why, but everybody agreed that it was kind of a mental thing. Craig Berube talked about that mental thing for the last couple weeks of the season, and that goes far beyond the home and road record.
We'll get into him in just a bit, but how about number 2 on your list, which was no secondary scoring? We know Claude Giroux, Jake Voracek, and Wayne Simmons, but one of the things about this team a couple of years ago was the depth. It seemed like a lot of different guys could all score 20 or more goals, and is that just a lot of guys not progressing?
That's certainly part of it. They had 7 20-goal scorers last year, and I believe it's 4 this year, and one of them was not in that crew last year. Michael Raffle hit 20 for the first time in his career. The Flyers lose Scott Hartnell. They traded him last June, so that was a guy that was not returning. But, Braden Shen fell a little bit short. I'm blanking on a couple others, but there were guys that just didn't progress the way that the Flyers thought they would, or didn't play up to snuff from last year. Vinny LeCavalier was another one, but to a certain extent, you understand because of the opportunities that he either was or wasn't given.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. The progression of some of these guys just not there. Braden Shen, although he came on late in the year, Matt Reed, 2 years now, it seemed like he has kind of taken a step back. Are some of these guys just not who we hoped or thought they might be?
It's difficult when a guy has only been in the league for like 2 years, because then you don't know which kind of player he is. You see a guy like Michael Raffle who's been in the league for 2 years, you see progression there, you kind of assume that he's going to be getting better. Matt Reed, it's tough to diagnose him. Did he have a down year? Were the injuries more than he let on? I mean, he would tell one reporter one thing about an injury and another reporter something else, that he was even more hurt. But, then, of course, uses the old sports cliche that they won't use it as an excuse. So it's kind of tough to read his season, but him and Sean Couturier have been a pair for the last 4 seasons now, I guess, when they both kind of broke into the league together. And that pair this year was not what it's been in the last 3 years. So in the case of Reed, I think it was, a situation where he was kind of taking a step back. But it's difficult to kind of project him going forward to see if he can be the guy that he was a couple seasons ago.
What do you make of Couturier? A couple of years ago, we looked at him as this shutdown guy. He was the guy that shut down the other guy's best player. It sounds like he doesn't want to be known as that guy, but can he be more than that?
At times, it seems like he might be. But the way that Craig Berube uses him, and I really struck a nerve with him yesterday when I asked him about that. He was not happy at all, saying that Patrice Bergeron, who is kind of an unfair comparison, a guy who's won Olympic gold. He's won the Selke Trophy twice in his career. He's 7 years older than Couturier. And, Craig Berube saying, well, this guy does it. And it's like you can't just throw somebody into the deep end and expect them to fight out of it and say, well, there you go. He fought out of it, and that's why he's this good. I think a player that's that young, and Couturier is still 22, he needs a little bit of help. So earlier in the season, what Berube took exception to was when I noted his zone starts, that Couturier was starting in the defensive zone a lot. And towards the end of the season, Berube was starting in the offensive zone a little bit more. But I think he still needs a little bit more help, I guess, to find that offensive game. I don't understand the argument of, well, he was an offensive guy in junior, so why isn't he in the best league in the world? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I agree, Dave. Let's look at some of the decisions coming up, some roster moves here. Let's first start with yesterday, Vinny Lecavalier and Sean Couturier to some extent, too. I know you wrote about that. They didn't seem to be on the same page as Berube. So does Berube come back, or do those two guys go? What do you think happens with the coaching situation?
I would be surprised if Craig Berube were standing behind the bench in October. I think there's just been too much smoke for there not to be fire. I don't know that his leaving or not leaving has anything to do specifically with Vinny Lecavalier, but I do expect Lecavalier to be back just because that's a really difficult contract to move, especially for somebody who showed as little production as he did this year. I think it would be difficult for somebody to look at him and say, yeah, this is somebody who I could find a fit for on my roster, even if they do see that he wasn't given, a ton of opportunity, especially at his natural position. Sean Couturier, I'd be really surprised if he was anywhere but Philadelphia come October, just because I think he's still in the young stages of his career. The Flyers still think, even though he didn't make the offensive jump that they expected him to this year, I think they understand that he's still kind of progressing there. And just because it didn't happen this year in a big spurt that he's done by any means, I don't think they're going to give up on him in that regard.
Dave Isaac's with us here covering the Flyers season, which ends with no playoffs this year. And obviously they got other roster decisions to make. They did bring Brandon Manning back in a one-year deal, a one-way deal, I should say, which means they have 7 defenders signed for next year. And you would say, well, their defense wasn't great this year. Why would they want to bring a lot of those guys back? Michael Del Zotto, restricted free agent. So what will the defense look like next year?
I believe they'll sign Del Zotto, too, and then they'll have 8 guys. But, I don't really know how to read that Manning contract just yet, because Oliver Lauridsen played, 2 games for the Flyers this season, or maybe even 1 game, and he was on a one-way contract. So to a certain extent, maybe it was just, to get Manning paid. That one way just means you're getting paid the same amount in the AHL or the NHL. So they could, put him on waivers and send him down to the minors after training camp if they wanted to, if he cleared. So I don't think that's a tough one to move down there. But even if you do that and Del Zotto resigns, you still have 7 guys. I think they end up moving 1 or 2 defensemen over the course of this summer because, like you said, their defense is really nothing to write home about this season. And I think that's an area that they want to see improvement. And you never know. Ron Hextall doesn't want to rush any of these kids, these draft picks that the Flyers have. But if they go into training camp and, push for a roster spot, it might be to the point where he can't ignore that, and one of these guys ends up winning a roster spot. So I do think that at least one person moves.
Of those defenders, the young guys, who is the closest?
I think they would like for Samu Morin to be the closest just because of his build, because he's 6'6" and he fills Chris Pronger's frame without having the experience and without necessarily proving it even in the juniors. But I don't know who is the closest. It's kind of tough to read. Shane Gostisbehere played 2 games this year, but Hextall made it very clear that he didn't want him to be playing those games. He kind of did it out of necessity. Robert Haig is the guy who's played the most in the AHL thus far, but I don't know if he's played consistently enough there to make that jump. And Travis Sanheim, who was their first-round pick last year, may be on the quickest track to the NHL, but I don't know if he's ready either. I don't know. It's tough to read at this point which one of these guys is going to be close. I mean, it may be a photo finish, but I don't know that any of them even do come up next year. I think in their minds they'd like to see Morin and Gostisbehere as a pair with the Phantoms next season and have those two develop together and come up to the NHL together maybe in 1 or 2 years.
Interesting. Dave Isaac with us here, the Flyers finishing off their season. And obviously you mentioned you couldn't envision that Berube will be behind the bench next year. And Vinny Lecavalier said he doesn't want to come back if Berube is here. But the way they handled LeCavier late, I think Berube really missed an opportunity to show that, hey, either this guy can or can't play anymore, and I'm going to show you that. Did they just not get along? I mean, was that a clear, fractured relationship there?
Both sides say that it was nothing off the ice, that they don't, have any issues with the other's personality or anything like that. I mean, Berube was very candid yesterday, and it almost read as a guy who kind of thinks he knows his fate and is maybe kind of getting in a couple parting shots on his way out. I mean, because the way that he was talking about LeCavier, saying he doesn't accept his role. I mean, this is a guy who's a borderline Hall of Famer, a guy who's won a Stanley Cup, and Craig Berube saying, you know what, I told him to be a right wing, so gosh darn it, he's got to be a right wing, even though he's never done that in his career. So I think it's just them not seeing eye to eye in a X's and O's hockey standpoint. And it's gotten, certainly, I think we're past the point of awkwardness at this point, but I don't think it goes much deeper than that.
Dave, in your 5 reasons, you didn't mention the coach. Is that something that you don't think that he belongs in the 5 reasons, or is he kind of part of the reason why the road record was what it was, part of the reason why there was not enough steps forward in the development?
Yeah, I think I probably could have applied him to each of those 5 things. I don't think it's because he's, got a pass or anything like that. I think that that is part of each of those 5 things, part of using players, part of, results. I mean, the NHL turns over coaches probably more than any other professional sports league. So, whenever there's results that aren't up to snuff, it's typically the coach that pays for it. So I probably didn't do a good enough job of making sure that he was kind of woven into all 5 of those.
Yeah, and we look at roster decisions, anything major. Some people, I know you wrote a piece a couple of, maybe last week about the core. At when do you give up on a core? The Flyers core has been together for a long time. It's much like the Eagles. You had McCoy and Macklin and Deshaun and a lot of talent, but not a lot of success. The Flyers are kind of going down that same road where these names seem like they're big, but there's not a lot of success. At what point do you look at this core and say, maybe they just don't have it together?
Right. Well, one of the things that I brought up in that story was, who do you consider to be part of that core? Because if you consider Steve Mason, then that core hasn't been together quite as long. Next year, it's been 2 years and, the portions from the trade deadline on, which is when they acquired him a couple seasons ago. So, I think if you consider him part of the core, and I think he is part of the core, then they should have a little bit more time there to figure it out. And this year, the way that it ended, and obviously no playoffs, makes it look like a huge step backwards. But when you look at the talent, you look at, Jake Voracek was in the scoring race from virtually beginning to end of the season. Mason finishes the season with the 3rd highest save percentage in the NHL. Claude Giroux didn't have his greatest year, but he was productive. It's tough to say that the talent isn't there. So I think when the core is as big as it is, the Flyers have like kind of 6 or 7 guys that you could put in that group, you probably will have to lose 1 or 2 of them just to, A, alleviate some cap space, and B, give up something to get the supporting cast that the core needs to take that next step.
Dave, what'd you make of Claude Giroux's season? He's the captain, obviously. Last year he was in the top 3 in the MVP race. What did you make of this year for him? Kind
of like how he evaluated himself yesterday, up and down a little bit. But when you look at his production, so much of it was on the power play. The Flyers, one of their goals this year was to be better at even strength, and he wasn't exactly in that regard because of how much of his points came on advantage. So I think that's one of the things that he'd like to see improvement in next. But it's tough to find a whole lot of holes in his game because he is one of those upper echelon, elite players, and he puts in, the tough minutes. He plays some penalty kill. He's not power play in it. He logs so many minutes on the ice. Is definitely a face-off guy. I think he led the NHL in face-offs taken. It's in some regards it's tough to find too many issues with him, but certainly at even strength 5-on-5, he would like to see more production there.
Would you be shocked if he, Voracek, Simmons, one of those 3, would be traded this offseason?
Yeah, I would be shocked if any one of those 3 guys left. I can't see any even if the Flyers win the lottery, and they have a 6.5% chance of doing that, even Connor McDavid doesn't make Claude Giroux expendable. And Jake Voracek and Wayne Simmons, I think they need both of those guys as their top two right wingers. What they need is a second-line center. And I don't see them getting rid of one of those guys to fill that void, because it just creates more holes elsewhere.
All right. What is one thing in free agency or via trade that you anticipate or think that they are going to do this offseason? I know Hextall has talked patience, but do you think they would be a team that is active in free agency, and what area do you anticipate them targeting?
Well, if they are active in free agency, it'll be because they made a trade or two, because they don't have big money to spend. They have a little bit, but they also need, to re-sign Del Zotto. They have to bring a backup goaltender in. So there's going to be a little bit of money that they need to spend. But I think if Ron Hextall has the money, he's going to try and get a scoring left winger to be on that top line. Michael Raffl did a pretty good job this year, but he's not exactly a guy with the pedigree of doing that on a consistent basis year in, year out. I think they would like to find somebody that does have that kind of history there to, carry that role next season and going forward. They also need a second-line center, but I think they have so many guys that have played center in their careers, and they're moving them to either wing to the point where they can kind of fill that role in-house if they had to pick one of the two. So I think that their biggest priority is going to be that scoring left winger.
All right, Dave G. Isaac on Twitter. By the way, on LeCavier, do you think he could still play at all? I mean, or do you think he's kind of – is Berube right? Is he at the end of the line? Or if he's playing center on the second line, is he still a guy who's serviceable?
It's tough to say that, with complete certainty that he can't, because we haven't seen him. I mean, he was only played that second-line center role for the first 3 games of the season. Mark Streit hits him with an errant slap shot in the foot. His foot breaks. By the time he comes back, he's playing right wing. So it's tough to say he can't do it because he hasn't been given the opportunity to. Is he a lot slower? Yeah. Is he the same kind of productive that he was, in his heyday? Absolutely not. But I don't know that he's done. He's certainly not Vinny LeCavalier, who won a Stanley Cup in 2004. But I would at least want to see him there before I said with all certainty that he couldn't do it anymore.
All right, Dave G. Isaac with plenty more on the Flyers. Check out Courier Post online and Dave G. Isaac on Twitter. And, of course, Dave, the Flyers, no playoffs means you get a early vacation. Congratulations, pal.
When are we golfing next week, Mike?
Anytime, man. Come on down, and we'll hit the links. I'll let you know, buddy. We'll get out there soon.
All right. Thanks a lot.
I'm about 140, though. You won't have fun playing with me. All right, man. Take care.
All righty.